Hey, well, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to episode number 77 of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. I am your host, Daniel Blackaby, and I am joined once again, as I always am, by the one, the only, Naya Carlson. How you doing today, Naya?
I'm feeling fresh today. The sun
Are
is
you?
out. The weather is lovely. I'm excited to sit outside and stare at the sky.
Yeah, and so instead of doing that, you're going to be on a podcast with me, which is even better
Yeah.
than being outside in God's creation, is talking about faith and pop culture.
We'll record outside one day.
The Faith and Pop Culture Podcast on location before a live audience. But
Exactly.
I'm excited. This is a good week. This is if you're a Christian, or I mean, honestly, if you're anyone, but this is like the biggie. This is Easter week. Really the most important week on the calendar for Christians. Although, just judging by the way we celebrate, typically we think of Christmas as being like the holiday, the big one, the season, the Christmas season, where Easter, I don't know, I know I maybe mention this every time Easter comes around for the podcast and stuff, but it just feels like it always flies under the radar. Like it's like, oh yeah, Easter's next week. Like I don't know, like
It's
we don't have
April.
like, yeah, like we don't, and I don't know if some of that's just that like the date changes, like it's always the first Sunday, but it's the actual, we don't have like December 25th.
Mhm.
I don't know, but it just always seems like it always catches me off guard when I start seeing like Easter bunnies in the grocery
Yeah.
store, and it's like, oh yeah, Easter.
I feel like it might be like a denominational thing too, because I think even with like Catholics, it's a much bigger deal. Like there's something happening every single day of Holy Week. And I don't
Yeah, there
know,
is.
you're Baptist, I'm Presbyterian, and we're like, well, we have a Good Friday service, and we have lunch after church on Sunday, which is great, but it doesn't feel as heavy in a good way as Christmas.
Yeah, like, I think there's just sort of a lack. I mean, yeah, I think you're right. In some denominations and traditions, there are more traditions and like kind of rituals or things to help remember the season. And I think, at least in the ones we come out of, it's maybe not as much. Which I don't know. I think it does. I know, like at Christmas time, there's always the like pushback of like, well, we don't need cultural stuff. Like, there's too much. It's become too cultural, and all
Mm-hmm.
that is like totally valid. But I think you also see it can help too to have, obviously, not just like secular commercialism ones, but like to have things in the culture that are like reminders and help kind of keep our attention beyond just like the religious
Yeah.
day or morning or whatever. So I don't know. I think Easter should be a bigger deal. So we are gonna here at the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast, we do take Easter seriously. So we're gonna do a whole episode on Easter themes, the death of Christ, the resurrection, and kind of look at this from a couple different ways. Look a little bit just at the way that I think the Easter story has so like permeated pop culture. Like you can't look far at like movies and like stories, all the big famous kind of influential ones. They all have some trace of sort of that gospel story of the death and the resurrection, the Easter. So we'll definitely get into that. But we did think we would. Something I've wanted to do actually, because I haven't done it for a while, is kind of revisit the Passion of the Christ, the 2004 film from Mel Gibson, because it is one of those. I don't know. Like, I know there's different ways you can trace it, but it seems like that's sort of where you trace back the boo, like that was the
Mm-hmm.
first real like where like a Bible adaptation, like other than like the Ten Commandments, like the real old ones, but for like the modern era, the first one where it's like it was a legitimate film. Like it wasn't just, we had like the Jesus film, which was very,
Yeah.
missional, and it wasn't like cinematic. It was just sort of telling the story, and there were some, some hokey kind of faith-based things that were around, but the Passion of the Christ was sort of the film that it was a huge success. It was made by at the time, one of the top kind of Hollywood filmmaker talents. It made a lot of money. It was influential. It kind of changed the narrative in Hollywood that like, hey, these movies actually there's interest, and I think eventually you sort of see today where it just seems like there's tons of these types of movies and shows, and every week there's some new one
Yeah.
in studios, and I don't know, like, I don't think you can trace all that back to just the Passion, but I think you can. You don't have to work too hard to trace a lot of it back to
Yeah.
like
It was a
that's the
tipping point for
yeah,
sure.
it was like a big a tipping point for that. So that we can kind of revisit a bit, especially one, just because it's important and it's obviously it's an Easter or at least a Good Friday
What?
movie, but also because there is the more Eastery Sunday part
Mhm.
of it is coming because at long last, all these years later, the sequel, which will be two movies, which I believe comes out in 2027. They're finishing production now, so it's kind of relevant again. This story, Mel Gibson's back, kind of the gang's back together. They're going to continue the story, so I thought we could kind of revisit it because I don't remember. I think I probably did some other time, like on home video, but I can't really remember. Like, I think my last time really watching this movie was in theaters, like when it came out. I'm older than you. I was 16 when this movie, or 15, 16. So I was just like a young teenager, and I remember all the hype of going. I remember vividly going, like with all a bunch of us from our youth group kind of went when it first released, and I remember
What
watching it.
was
I remember,
that like? Did you
yeah, like,
expect all the gore?
yeah. I mean, I'll share a little bit about kind of my
Okay.
experience with it because I think there is. I remember I don't really remember my experience of the movie a whole lot. I remember some. I do remember my kind of the experience after the movie, like kind of what was going through my mind, and we will touch on that. So to prepare, because we are nothing if not studious and prepared for these
That's right.
podcasts. Both of us, like this last couple days, we went back and we watched The Passion of the Christ. I don't know how long, if you had ever seen it or how long it had been
I
since
had
you were but a baby when this movie first came out. So maybe get into a little because I think there's some significant stuff, and I feel like I, I have thoughts on it. But
Yeah.
maybe just some of your initial thoughts on just kind of the legacy of this movie and maybe your personal uh, experience of it, revisiting it this week.
Yeah, I mean, there I think infamously were so many crazy things that were happening like on set as they were filming it. Like Jim Caviezel got like hypothermia, he got struck by lightning, and there were like random storms kept popping up as they were filming it. So there was a lot of weird stuff that happened behind the scenes, but like once it came out, it grossed $612 million worldwide, and Mel Gibson had to put in $30 million of his own money to finance it because no company, no person would invest in it. They thought it was just gonna be like no one was gonna want to come see it because of how gory it is and all of this stuff. It was the fifth highest grossing film of 2004 internationally, and it was the highest grossing Christian film of all time, the highest grossing independent film of all time, the highest grossing R-rated film in the US for 20 years. And I don't do you know what overtook it? I can't
I think
remember.
the first or the second Deadpool movie I think was the one that
Okay.
finally passed it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't realize that one was independent. Um, but
Well, not
yeah, and
independent, but R-rated.
yeah,
I don't know what the
R-rated,
independent one.
R-rated.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes, you're right, R-rated.
Hmm.
But I thought I had seen it before, but I started watching it and I was like, I don't remember any of this. I think my grandma had it on the TV when I was like 10 or something. And so I remember like the nails getting driven into his hands. I just remember being like completely horrified and traumatized by that. Of many other movies that we saw at grandma's house.
So
Um,
if you had not seen the movie, were you like shocked by the plot twists and like what happened with the story? Like,
yeah, I
experiencing
was
it for
like,
the first time?
he's alive? But I thought it was really, really good, really well done. It was super bloody, but I mean, I really appreciated the fact that Mel, our good friend Mel, Gibson,
Melvin, we call him. So
Melvin, yes,
yeah.
Mel, he wanted to show like how truly horrible it would have been, and he had talked about how he said it's been sanitized a fair bit so that it's become ineffectual, and I wanted to illustrate the extent of the sacrifice Christ made, and I think that he did that very well. um, but I was shocked. I liked that it was in Aramaic and Latin, and I was determined to like watch it without turning on subtitles, and I lasted for 20 minutes. And then I turned it on.
Which Gibson didn't want subtitles. Like
I
as far as I can tell,
know.
like he wanted it to be as authentic, and like the studio was like, well, like it's still a movie, and people need
Yeah.
to, you know, there needs to be some understanding of.
Especially if there's people that like aren't familiar with the Jesus story, I think that it's a lot more
Yeah. And
helpful.
people like me who's a little rusty on my Aramaic, it's like
Yeah,
I just
and
can't
my
keep up with the
Latin.
stuff. Yeah.
I thought that
Um,
they were speaking Italian half the time because I was like, I've been doing Duolingo Italian. I'll be fine. It was not Italian. But it was interesting too that a lot of like the imagery and everything came from sources other than scripture. And I feel like people are like, oh, this is going to take away from this story. Like, didn't happen. But honestly, I think that it's okay to speculate that Mary would, like, wipe up Jesus's blood with her clothes, or that Judas, like, kept seeing visions of the devil and all of this. I think it provides, like, some other point of views for
yeah,
the
I don't think,
audience.
and again, I'll be honest, like I didn't do like a deep dive to compare all the, it's like that's probably not in scripture or that way, but I didn't like go back and check it all. It didn't feel like to me like there are obviously things that with any adaptation that are going to be different.
Yeah.
It didn't feel, and maybe I'm just like I'm jaded from some of the more recent adaptations that are just wildly going off the scripture, like going outside the scripture and like having crazy things happen. And, like the carpenter's son, like those horror, or Jesus is like having a fist fight with Satan, and like it doesn't seem to me like the additions that they made weren't like, oh gosh, that changes the gospel story in a
hmm
significant way. It was, I don't know, it didn't seem like there were any, uh, obviously you have like Satan appearing and sort of how they visualize some of that, which you don't get in scripture.
Yeah.
But I don't know, that to me didn't necessarily feel like a direct change in scripture.
Those
Like it,
Yeah, it was interesting. I saw that I think that one specifically and with Mary wiping up Jesus's blood came from like this book written by a nun a long, long time ago. I don't remember her name. And she had visions of these things and wrote it down, but people say that her editor like changed it a lot to push his own agenda. So that's kind of
editors.
I know. They're the worst.
Yeah, and I mean there is some stuff like he's obviously Gibson was pulling a lot from just like his Catholic background and just some things like Mary Magdalene being like the woman caught in adultery and like saved from stoning, which isn't based in scripture. That's just sort of out there that people always make that conflate
Oh
those two
yeah, yeah.
stories, which is not like that's not those are two, as far as we can tell, different people. But in this adaptation, they're shown to be the same person. I'll say my thoughts is that like I remember when I first watched this movie back as an inexperienced, a dumb 16-year-old kid, as opposed to a dumb 39-year-old person. Like I didn't like it. Like I didn't like the movie. I didn't like hate the movie. I just wasn't like moved by it the way that other people were, and
Mhm.
I felt kind of conflicted. And even like that's like I was saying, like, my experience. I remember leaving the theater, and it was like no one really knew what to do, like because we just saw that movie, and it's like everyone's like quiet, like walking out to the car, and like I don't know. I just remember thinking like we're all. It sort of feels like we should be more devastated or more whatever or like solemn, and I just didn't feel that. Like
Yeah.
it's like I don't think I liked that movie, but like I almost like there's like a sense of guilt that like but like I can't not like a movie that was just like a graphic depiction of the crucifixion of Jesus. Like it's like I sort of felt compelled as a good Christian to, and I think there's sort of some of that tension. And I'll
Wait,
say like,
why didn't you like it?
well, I think for the same reasons I still don't like it. Like
Okay.
I'll say,
Do share.
yeah, and I'll say I'm with you as far as I think it's a good movie. Like I think Mel Gibson, for whatever his career path took and whatever you think of him these days, like the guy can make a movie. Like the
Mhm.
guy is incredible filmmaker, and he's proven that in other movies. He proves that in this movie. Like, this is probably like the most talented creative that we've had make a Bible adaptation. Like
Yeah.
like there's been a lot of
Besides
good
Sc
ones lately.
yeah.
Yeah, except
Besides
for maybe
Scorsese if you count him.
yeah, like, or maybe that's made like a more orthodox Bible movie, like a
Yeah.
more. But it's just as far as like filmmaking. Like this movie is a well-made film. Like it looks even for its time. Like it's an
Mhm.
older movie now, and it still looks really good. And it has sort of that like classic biblical scope, like the way they use the lighting, and like
Yeah.
so much about the movie is cool. I'm with you. I like the language thing. I know some people don't. I actually like. I don't mind subtitles. Like I think dubbed movies are like should be
Those are the
punishable by death.
worst. Oh
Like
my
never
gosh.
watch it. Like
Uh-uh.
Subtitles are the way to go, and I did think it like, I like that it kinda reminds viewers that there is sort of this, like, cultural distance, like, that it was set in a different time. I don't know, I like some of what, that does, and then I even like I still like the idea that they focus in on, like, the last, like, whatever, 12 hours, 10 hour of Jesus's life, and they intersperse flashbacks and stuff, but, like, I think by focusing it and not just telling, like, the whole Jesus story,
Mhm.
in some ways, I think it's really effective. In other ways, I think it ends up being kind of an incomplete story that is about part of the story, and as a result is kind of about none of the story because you
Yeah,
miss sort of the importance of that event when it's taken,
when they
out of,
don't, yeah, show the emphasis
um
on the resurrection,
yeah, and I
I
think, like,
think.
it's an interesting one too because it's not, like, it's not an enjoyable movie, and I don't think was intended to be it's, like, a
Mm-mm.
more meditative movie, which I think puts more emphasis on the, like, meditative part. Like, what is this movie actually portraying about the subject matter? Because it's not like you just, grab more popcorn and a Diet Coke and,
Yeah.
"Yeah, this is a great movie. Yeah, let's go see it again." Like,
It's
it's
like
it's
it's
supposed to hit you
solemn.
hard, and, like,
Mhm.
it's like a supposed to be more of like a worship, like a spiritual experience or whatever, and I think that's where I get thrown off with this movie is, as a movie, it's a well-made movie. There's some really cool stuff going on with it, and I think it depicts the parts that it depicts, I think it depicts well. I just think that I don't know, I wouldn't call it like the message or even the themes. I don't know what I would call it. Like the sort of the essence of what this movie is about. To me, just I feel the same as I did as a teenager that it kind of misses it. And I think the part that is for me is the violence. Like
Mhm.
I think that is sort of I don't know. I think maybe that is what some people like. It seems like what he wanted, like that he wanted to be like, hey, this was a violent event, and like a lot of the depictions we have are very clean and very, like he says, sanitized.
Mhm.
And Gibson very much wanted to like be no, like this was horrific. Like this was
Yeah.
not, some pretty event. And it's interesting too because I even I forgot that they did it. They re-released the movie. I don't know if you saw this and you're like the Passion recut, which I don't know, kind of
Is
sounds
it
silly.
longer?
No, I think it's shorter actually, but
Okay.
they cut out some of the violence. Like
Oh.
they sort of did what Gibson was trying not to do, and like
Yeah.
they tried to get it down to like a PG-13 because he's like, well, people.
How do you do that with that movie?
Yeah, well, I don't think they succeeded. I think they ended up it was still R, so they released it like unrated, but they cut out a lot of the blood and a lot of the more graphic moments. Um, but obviously like, there was still so much of that that it was they couldn't get it all the way down. But they tried to do it the same that they did it for other like what's the guy's name? The Mark Wahlberg, his pastor movie where they re-released it without the
Oh, like
profanity. Like
Father Stew or
yeah,
something?
like where they've tried to like, hey, this is a good movie, and it was like intentionally raw and kind of not vulgar, but like graphic,
Yeah.
but a lot of Christians aren't comfortable with that, so we also re-release it for those, and I don't know, in some ways, I feel like that the fact that they had to do that kind of is like a point for Team Gibson, and like I don't know, there's something to that that it's so graphic that we can't. It makes us feel uncomfortable to see Jesus suffer like that,
Yeah.
so we wanted to water it down and make it more like I don't know. Like
Yeah.
to me, it there's a point to be made that that sort of proves the necessity of
Mhm.
the violence. I think I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on this too. Is this that I feel like this movie becomes all about the violence. Like it's like I know like it becomes I wouldn't go as far like I know critics have called it like torture porn where it's just like 2 hours of unrelenting torture for Jesus and like I wouldn't
Yeah.
use that language myself. But I do think it becomes like the violence becomes like the point and obviously the violence was a part of the story, but I don't think violence like physical pain is the point of the gospel story. Like
Yeah, because you
that
don't
wasn't the
really
like
see his ministry either beforehand or his
yeah,
resurrection
or
after.
just like the spiritual, like people I've heard pastors be like, like no one suffered a more painful death than
Mhm.
Jesus. And it's like, well, that's actually not true. Like
Mhm.
people, like he was crucified by beside two other people. Like Peter, according to traditions, like crucified upside down. Like early Christians, like go read some of the ways they were martyred, like skinned alive, like, horrific deaths. Like the fact Jesus doesn't need to have suffered the most, number one on the list of most painful deaths in order for it to be a significant story. Like, I think he suffered the most pain because he took on sin. Like the
Yeah.
spiritual element, like it wasn't just that he, for 10 hours experienced excruciating pain and we need to really just hammer that home. It's like, well, no, there's a whole spiritual dimension to that
Hmm.
that is actually the point of this of like that was his suffering, not just the being whipped and hung. Not that that was
Yeah.
insignificant. And I just feel like this movie doesn't have any of that. Like it doesn't have any it sorta to me, it sorta works by, not guilting, that seems too, like, manipulative, but it sorta just I don't know, it tries to, like, shock you, like, "Look how much physical pain Jesus took." But I feel like
Yeah.
which is
I think
which
it's
I
a
mean is a part of it.
valuable insight, but it's not the whole thing. So, like, if we just laud this movie, it's like, this is the one you need to watch to understand Jesus and the Christian faith, that's wrong. But I think it's a good perspective to have. I think also to your point of like it feeling incomplete too. Like, it's interesting because the movie doesn't really have a lot of ups and downs. It starts high, and
Mm.
it just stays at that level and just gets gradually a little higher, which, like, as human beings, it's hard to, like, maintain that level of shock and horror for so long. That's why, like, horror movies have the moments of, like, calm, and then there's the jump scare, you know? It's a whole it's our graph with the climax at the top, but it's just like this the whole time. And so I think that just from a structural perspective of the movie, I think that has a big hand in why it might feel a little incomplete as well. Because even though it's like horrible, horrible things, you kind of like as he's being whipped, like these scenes last for so long too. It's just it's hard to stay in that space of shock the entire
Yeah,
time.
and I think, like, it is effective to sort of jar you because it is unrelenting, it's like, it makes you sort of uncomfortable, and I think I don't know, there are things to that I do think is works. I just find it to be such, like, a human perspective on like, it to me, it's sorta seeing the crucifixion almost wholly through the eyes of, like, humans. Like,
Mhm.
it's a man, and you don't really there's very little that even connects him to, like, the Son of God other than that we just know he is because he's Jesus, and we sort of are familiar with the story. There's very little of, like, the resurrection, like, the miracle aspect of the story. That's just like almost a footnote at the end of the movie, and like the pain he suffered is almost like entirely physical torture pain, which is very like what we can grab. There isn't any sort of spiritual dimension to it. That I don't know. For me, I just think if if the focus on and it's sort of like this. I feel the same way with like nativities at Christmas, or like I feel like the sort of the images that we surround ourselves with sort of colors our perspective on like a lot of what we think about the Christmas story, like the wise men and there's so many different parts come because we just that's what we've seen in nativities and Bible movies, and so we just sort of assume that that's the case. And I feel like there's the same danger for a movie like this, that if the emphasis is all on the physical pain, then you're missing the more significant part of the
Mhm.
story. Like, not that the physical pain is just maybe more like inverse, that it's not like he suffered a lot of pain. And there's also some like spiritual stuff. It's like, no, like he suffered spiritual, he lowered himself, like gave his power, was took on the sins of the world, and there was also a moment of excruciating pain. But like that's more the footnote than the spiritual. Like the spiritual stuff is what like anyone like other Christians suffered more painful deaths than him after him. They did not do what Jesus did because they can't. Like the part that
Yeah.
separates Jesus is the spiritual, and I feel like this movie just doesn't do it. And I think the other part is this: I feel like it's incomplete without the resurrection. Like
Mhm.
they sort of they include it at the end. Like there is sort of that like, don't worry, like and I think maybe the new movies will help with that because
Yeah.
they'll we can watch them together and then sort of get the full picture. But I just think I don't know, and this might be a me problem. I feel like a lot of times it's just a me problem. But I'll be honest, like I don't like Good Friday service. Like I struggle with Good Friday services at church, not because they're not well done or good. I just and I think it might just depend on what your church does for the services, but I know like a lot of the churches I've been in, they sort of approach Good Friday service as though Easter is not happening. Like we're sort of living it in
Oh
real
yeah.
time. Like, it gets very divorced from. Like it's very solemn and very. It's just all about the suffering, and we leave silently, and I just think that I don't know. I don't think for me. I just feel like at this point, like you can't separate those two. Like the death.
No,
Like
you
we
can't.
shouldn't act as though the resurrection hasn't happened, and like the whole point of the story, if you just focus on sort of the suffering and the death without the resurrection, then that's not a complete gospel story. And I feel this maybe that's why, like for a movie like this, I feel like it's just not a complete like you don't really you get the death, but you get very little of like the victory over death, other
Yeah.
than the scene at the end
Where
where he
he's
clearly
smiling. Yeah.
he's like, "Don't worry, I'm back." Like you do sort of get some of that, but it just I don't know. To me, I think a lot of the focus can come on the death, and it's like, well, that the Easter story is the resurrection. Like the death, this enabled that, but without the resurrection, the death means nothing. Like,
Mhm.
so I don't know. But I think I have no. I'm not. I don't dislike the movie. It just even now watching it again, like it just doesn't do anything for me. Like it just. I think it's a good reminder of the physical pain, but I don't know. I think it does become overly focused on that.
Yeah. I
So
will say before we move on, I was thinking about this more and more. I really liked the portrayal of like Satan as sort of an androgynous person and also super calm, just walking through the crowd as the chaos that he has has like the domino effect of his chaos just is breaking out. But like this look between Jesus and Satan is just like Satan's so smug, and then he like little does he know Jesus is coming back and you're done, buddy. I don't know. I just thought that moment was really cool when they're just it's quiet, but you can still see all of the chaos happening and Satan's just walking through, just like I have the power
yeah,
now. But you
I've got
don't, buddy.
which, and I will say I like, although as an aside, and I'm curious if you thought the same thing. The moment where I think it's during the whipping or wherever it is, where like he's like holding like a baby or something,
Yeah,
and my first thought is like Lord Voldemort.
exactly. I was like, it's literally Voldemort.
Oh, I was like, so that threw me for a bit, but yeah, I did. I think I've seen criticism from people that didn't like the Satan stuff, and and I think largely because that's sort of the speculative stuff. I actually liked it though because I think that was basically the only way that the movie kind of visualized that there was spiritual stuff going on. Like
Yeah.
that sort of was the answer to my what I feel like
Mhm.
was missing is like no, it's not just that a guy got tortured for 10 hours and killed. Like there was this whole spiritual warfare and dynamic going on, and I think sprinkling in a little, dose of Satan here or there. I don't know. I think it was effective to show like no, like,
Yeah.
there was a whole different dimension going on that is harder to depict. So it's not shown as much. So yeah, I did like, and I mean, Satan was creepy, and I think effectively
Yeah.
creepy. But yeah, I am glad that I watched it again, especially with the new ones coming out. And it is interesting to think back in hindsight, like so much has changed since that movie came out in the industry and stuff that it's I don't know, it's like a time capsule to go back and sort of see like, back in the day that was like the only time you'd see the Bible on screen,
Yeah.
and now there's just so much of it.
Mhm.
But speaking of so much of it and so much of resurrection and Easter themes, it's everywhere. And whether it's like a Bible adaptation, The Passion of the Christ 3 or 4 or however many of these Mel Gibson decides to make, um, you don't need to look far, and we've talked about this. We've touched on this on the podcast and other things before, but like these types of stories, like these themes of resurrection, like are prevalent all throughout Hollywood. And I mean, all throughout the arts beyond
Mhm.
just movies. But I think sometimes we think of it as only in terms of, like, there are no Easter movies, and we think of like crucifixion, resurrection stories like the literal ones, but you say, well, from a certain point of view, as Obi-Wan would think, like there's like
There's
the Easter
many.
story is probably influenced more stories and movies than like anything else. Like
Yeah.
it's like a universal sort of theme. Like I don't know if you like any that come to mind for you. So I do think it is significant that this motif, this like resurrection motif, or whatever you want, like,
Mhm.
archetype, whatever you want to call it, like that it is an archetype. Like I think that comes from
Yeah.
somewhere, and I think there's a lot of Christian application for that. But what are some of your, like, I know you being a filmmaker yourself, film
Yeah.
grad, some would say an expert in all things cinema. Like, where do you like what comes to mind for you as far as like these types of stories?
Yeah, I mean, the first one that comes to mind for me is Harry Potter because it's literally the gospel, which is why I get this is a personal thing. I personally get really upset when Christians don't want to read Harry Potter. But I know that's your personal conviction, it's fine, but I'm like it's literally the gospel. Harry is the Christ figure, Voldemort is Satan. They have to fight at the end. and and yeah, anyways, I have a lot to say about that. But Harry Potter is the first one that comes to mind. Lord of the Rings, just any kind of movie, show, book where a character honestly is redeemed and changed. I think that's also a form of resurrection, you know, you dying to your old self, come back new. And so like in the last Airbender series, that would be like Prince Zuko's character. In Lord of the Rings, that's Boromir's character. It's everywhere. In high school, I think we've talked about this before, but in in my last lit class, we had to read a book for summer reading. It took forever, okay, but it was worth it. This part was worth it at least. It was called How
Dr.
to
Seuss.
Read. Yes, we read Dr. Seuss. It's called How to Read Literature Like a Professor.
Uh-huh. Good book.
Um, it is a good book. It's worth a read, and he talks about how I'm gonna give you the spark notes. It talks about how every story comes from Shakespeare or the Bible, which I just think is really really cool. Like he even said that every time a character comes out from the water, they've been baptized and they're a new person, or like when it's raining on them, same thing. And just having a Christ figure is such a major component to literature. I think honestly, I think it's probably the most powerful trope, if you will, that we have because it's just the ultimate truth that really resounds in everyone's hearts and lives. Yeah, I think it's
Yeah, and I
just
think that in the hearts too, because I mean, I would say everything comes from the Bible,
yeah,
including Shakespeare.
I
I think
agree.
Shakespeare was coming from, and maybe not like not necessarily the Bible. I think from the Bible, like the Bible as a book
Or
is,
biblical truths
um,
at least.
but I think like from the story of like because obviously the events of the Bible happened, like the whole spiritual, the creation of man and like Adam and Eve, like that happened long before the Bible was a book. And I think like, but so I think like those story, like our story, our spiritual story that was put into the Bible, like that has influenced all
Mhm.
storytelling to some degree. And I know I'm a big I don't know if you went through much of this in, like, your film school, like, I'm a big Joseph Campbell guy. Like, I think, like, the hero's journey, like, his
Mhm.
whole, Hero with a Thousand Faces, like, his whole theory of like, if you're not familiar, he's the one that he's, like, a mythologist, and he researched this, like, thousands of myths from all cultures, and had his, like, hypothesis, his theory was that, like, everything is we just tell the same story over and over, and there's he mapped out what that story is, and like some stories tell parts of it, not all, like, but his argument was like there's one story that all cultures throughout history have told, and we just keep telling it. And he wasn't a Christian, he was like a weird spiritual new age kind of guy, so like he didn't attach that to Jesus. Like he thought the Jesus was one of those stories,
Yeah.
among many. Like so like I diverge from him when it comes to like the application, where I would say no, like I think he's right. Like this
Mhm.
is the universal story. Um, and even the ones that don't follow the path are usually not following that template because they're intentionally trying to deconstruct the template, which is being influenced like no less than like they're still
Yeah.
very much sort of responding to that template. And like,
Mhm.
the hero is an anti-hero. Well, that's still part of that template. Um, but I'm fascinated by that idea, like whether it's 100% every story or not, like just the idea that some stories, like this story, is sort of universal throughout time and throughout cultures, and that like a key part of that story, I mean the whole story in many ways aligns with the gospel. Is this significant to me? Like, there's a quote in one of his books where Joseph Campbell It says, one thing that comes out in myths is that at the bottom of the abyss comes the voice of salvation. The black moment is the moment when the real message of transformation is going to come. At the darkest moment comes the light. And kind of, I guess, you look through like this archetypal story. It's like the death of the hero, whether that's like a physical death or like a metaphorical dying to self. Like there's a death and like a resurrection, and then like after that comes salvation. And I don't know. I think that's, to me, that is such a fascinating idea that like the story that we've been telling, either like intentionally or like subconsciously, is the gospel story. Like I feel like that to me is evidence of, like, I would say the Easter story is like wired into like our DNA of our soul. Like we're, whether we believe it or we're consciously trying to retell the Easter story, like I just like we're primed to think of salvation as only being able to come through like the death of a hero and like the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Like essentially, or we're primed for the gospel,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is cool. I think
Yeah.
that's like, I don't know, like I think like obviously, and I think maybe even a couple weeks ago we talked about like Christ figures. Like I think you can like make too much of it, where like, you know, every time there's one of these moments, it's like that's the gospel, like that's the, this is gonna change, you know, like
Yeah.
salvation. This is a Christian. Everything's a Christian movie. It's like, well, I don't know if I go that far, but I do think it is reflecting the fact that we're wired for the Easter story.
Yeah.
I don't know. Like, do you, what do you think about some of? I don't know if you did much with like the archetypes and all that kind of stuff, but like, what are your thoughts on some of that?
I mean, I agree. I think I need to gather my thoughts. Um,
Well, I'll say too, because I did I explored some of this in my I wrote my this is my chance to be snooty. You get to be the film school grad. I get to be, when I was doing
you're
my
the one that
doctoral
makes that
studies.
snooty. I don't make that snooty.
uh, but when I was doing my snooty PhD work, I did my dissertation on literature and how it. I think the fact that we have literature is like an argument for the existence of God. And I looked at beauty, and I looked at language, and I looked at all these different aspects of literature. But part of it was I looked at one of the sections of the dissertation was on like like what we write about, like these stories. How does that reflect and kind of point? And I kind of looked like there's a whole, I don't want to get all the way into it, but like literary Darwinism, like there's a whole branch of like literary theory and philosophy that attempts to like essentially like what Christians do with the gospel, like trying to read in gospel themes. They do that to like evolution and Darwinism, and like they try and sort of find like, why do we tell these types of stories? Well, it's all because it's,
Hmm.
about Darwin, natural selection and survival of the fittest, and so it's all about resources and all that kind of stuff. And like this archetype, the sacrifice and like the resurrection is like the most anti sort of like Darwinian, like natural, like it makes no sense, and like from any perspective other
Hmm.
than a spiritual one. Like you don't have self-sacrifice in the animal world. Like you don't have, like a tiger sacrificing himself for the good of the other tiger. Like you have tigers that or lions like eat each other because they want power. Like
Yeah.
this whole motif, like came from somewhere, and it couldn't have come from just sort of evolution. And we're all animals, and we tell these stories because it's like the most opposite of that, which
Yeah.
I think to me is this, it's a reminder too, like whether it's the full picture of the gospel or just like a very feeble glimmer of it, like it's still a reminder of just like that we are different. Like we're not just animals telling these stories. There is a part of our experience and expectation that is deeply kind of counter into
Hmm.
intuitive, like that is very spiritual. And so I don't know, I always like these types of stories. I think the the idea that we don't really have a lot of Easter movies, like we have Christmas movies, as a whole genre of movies,
I
and they're
know.
awesome. So nothing. This is no shame against Christmas movies. It's not too early if you still want to go watch Muppet Christmas Carol, even here in April. But the idea that we don't really have a lot of Easter movies, like I don't know how many Easter Bunny movies there are. It's like, well, but we do have a ton of Easter movies. They're just scattered throughout
Yeah.
almost all the other stories that we tell. So I don't know. I think I think there's a lot there for Christians to think about. And I would encourage you guys to, as you guys watch movies, not that it's like a Where's Waldo of there's the Christ figure, there's the Easter, but like, but I mean, some of that's not bad. Like some of that to sort
Yeah.
of notice, like, hey, that's coming straight from the gospel, like the Easter story, even in a movie that may otherwise be entirely like not aligned with any part of scripture. uh, I think still look and find some of those. So maybe as a challenge, this season coming through Easter, find the Easter story in other movies, because I think it is encouraging. But the thing I do know is encouraging, and edifying, and you can always pinpoint, the good, the true, and the beautiful in, is the final segment of this podcast episode, which is things we like that you should like too. So this is my week, and I don't want to, I would just say you haven't necessarily set the bar too high. You've been going
You
a
don't
little
like
off
my
book.
abstract thoughts?
You've been, which I'm all for the abstract, although I will be more traditional this week, just because it's something that's fresh on my mind. And in some ways, it's a cheat, because I feel like this is something that probably everyone already likes. So I'm not necessarily introducing to it, but we collectively can like this together. And that is the Dark Knight trilogy by Christopher Nolan. So I hadn't seen, I think everyone sort of acknowledges that these movies are great, like especially The Dark Knight, like the second one is great. I hadn't seen these movies in a long time. Like I can't remember the last time, like probably not long after they came out. Like I'm not, other than Jaws, which I watch like 3 times a year, and like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter, which at least once a year, me and my wife watch through all those. Other than those, like I really don't rewatch movies. Like there's not very many movies that I go back to watch again, even if I like them. There's just too many new ones, and I don't know, I just don't have the patience for that. But having kids, and as they've got older, has given me the opportunity to like go back and like, hey, they're old enough now, because my kids are 11 now, so like they're about old enough where they can handle like good stuff. And like, so we've kind of been working through some of these old movies. Like I showed them Inception when they're homesick, and like, some of these movies that maybe they're slightly young for, but they can still mostly follow it. So we finished watching through the last week or so, as a family, the Dark Knight trilogy. The first time they've seen it, first time I've seen it in a long time, and I'd forgotten, like, these movies are awesome. Like these, and like I know there was a time when I think comic book movies in general were doing real well. I've been super checked out of comic book movies these days. Like, I don't know, even the ones I like, I'm like, I like them. I don't think it's necessarily good. It's like, there's enjoyable, but there's not really ones that like, well, man, like, that was an experience. Like, there hasn't been many of those lately. And seeing these, like the Dark Knight movies again, you just sort of realize like the peak. Like you realize like what you realize like what the genre could be. Not that they all need to be that, like they all need to be super serious, and that's not really my point, but like just made from a guy that is making a great movie and dealing with cool themes, epic, fun, thoughtful. Like it's just like, yeah, comic book movies can be awesome.
How do you think they compare to like The Batman with
like the
Robert
new one?
Pattinson? Yeah.
See, I actually really liked that the new Batman too. Like
Me
I know a lot of
too.
people didn't. I don't think it's as good, but I don't know. I haven't seen it since theaters. I need to see it again. But I really liked it. Like I think
love
it
that
did.
one. Yeah.
So I think Batman's been doing pretty well. It's just some of the other guys that that
They need to step it up a little
need to
bit.
step. Like I wasn't crazy about the last Superman. Like it was, I don't know, whatever, it was fine. But I don't know. There's just so much about these movies, and my kids loved them. So if you haven't seen the Dark Knight movies ever, then obviously go watch them. But if it's been a while too, go watch them again. Remember, movies can be cool. Even the third one, which I know most people don't really like, and it is, I think, maybe the weakest of the three.
I don't
Maybe
even
maybe
remember
it's better
that
than
one.
yeah. I
I'm
guess
gonna be honest.
it kind of felt like Nolan just didn't really want to make a third one.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you need a trilogy, so he made it, and it is really interesting. There's just Batman's not in it. He's there's like 10-minute maybe of Batman in the whole movie, but there is some like really interesting themes and stuff going on in it. And I think it is. I liked it for what it was. So if you haven't seen it for a while, go watch it, and just remember how cool these movies can be. And also, Christopher Nolan's awesome. So it's always good to be reminded of that. But something else that is awesome is this podcast, and you guys for listening every week. This is fun. Obviously, this is an important week beyond just like pop culture. So, wish all you guys a very happy Easter. Make sure to actually celebrate it, and however you do that. But don't just binge Netflix all the time. Like, I don't know. Try and do something to set it apart as being a special day remind you of that. But we will be back not quite 3 days later, 2 days later, I guess. After Easter, we will return from the grave with another episode of the Faith and Pop Culture Podcast. So we hope you will see us then and every week for more conversations on faith and pop culture.